Hi folks, welcome to LEA560 Lecture 3. We're talking about managing diverse teams. We've been dealing a lot with complexity theory and some of the different items concerning that. Well, in this particular lecture now, we're going to be talking about the silo effect and a possible way of confronting that or dealing with that, which is using Theory U. And so we're going to be learning a little bit about Theory U. I think it's an interesting study. I think you're going to enjoy it. So sit back, take a few notes, and kind of see what you come up with here. First of all, let's talk about what is the silo effect. And this is when it's when an organization becomes, I guess, they have blinders on. They each become so compartmentalized that there is a lack of information that is flowing between the groups or maybe parts of an organization. If you look at, for instance, a farm. On a farm, silos prevent different grains from mixing. And in an organization, the silo effect limits the interactions between members of different branches of the company. All of this leads to reduced productivity when people can't talk, when people can't communicate. And I'm not saying that they never communicate, but because of the structure that is in place, and it leads to only formalized communication, and it really does have a tendency to prevent being adaptable as a company. It also brings you to a place where that you find yourself not getting the best out of your workers, the best out of your company, and being able to do a lot. So the silo effect, that's basically what it is. Now, when you think about how is your organization run, and I want you to really think about this, whether you might be a pastor and you're looking at your church and the structure that you have there. You might be in a nonprofit organization. You might be in a for-profit organization. Whatever that case is, I want you to kind of think about, well, how is my organization run here? Are we siloed? And so how do you know if you're in a silo? Well, ask yourself some of these questions, and I've written them down so that you can follow along and see it. First of all, when you have a meeting, are they run top down? In other words, boy, there it is, and here's the agenda, and this is what we're doing. And so everybody look at this agenda, and it's a pretty complicated way of actually getting something to be on the agenda and to actually discuss it. It's pretty vertical in its organizational structure. It's pretty top down. Or do they include a free exchange of ideas and information? Boy, everybody comes together and this is what we're talking about. Let's have at it. Let's talk about it. Another thing, do facilities and multi-chain organizations, do they have a wildly different corporate culture? Or do they operate in a similar fashion? I mean, do they all reflect the values of the organization? And that doesn't have to just be like, for instance, we have our Grand Rapids location and then we have our Kalamazoo location. That can even be within the same building. It can be on the same campus, where that you have one particular building, and boy, the culture of that building and everything that happens in that building is completely different from what happens in this one. It might be like a lot of universities deal with this, where that, hey, we have our traditional group, and then we have our online adult group, and then we have our graduate group. And all three departments are run completely different, and they don't interact with one another, and they don't deal with one another. So does that happen? I'm not saying that happens here at Grace, but I'm just saying those are things that can possibly happen. Another thing to look at, are there communication challenges, such as it's difficult to reach team members, or there's a lack of effective correspondence. You know, there's the system that's in place to allow people to actually talk and that sort of thing. It's hard to get through to certain people. It's hard to reach certain people. It's hard to relay information between facilities, between departments, between staff members. Well, that doesn't have anything to do with them, or that's nothing that's there. I can tell you stories. I heard one story just recently about a particular person, and this was in a collegiate setting, but he did not, under any circumstance, want his team talking to the traditional section of the college or university. They said, "This is ours. You don't need to talk to them. You don't need to discuss any of this with them." That's an extreme example of the silo effect. That's an extreme example of that, but it's an example where that happens. Another thing that might tip you off that maybe you are in a siloed situation: are your customers angry, anxious, maybe a little demanding, or do they feel valued and a part of the team? Let me give you an example of that. Well, somebody comes and they want to talk to you about something that's going on. Instead of you saying, "Well, let me see if I can help you. If I can't, let me see if I can get you to the right person. We want to make sure this is taken care of with whatever your needs or concerns are." You say, "Well, I'm sorry, that's not my department. Let me transfer you." And then it goes to that department. "I'm sorry, that's not our department." And they transfer you to another one. And they become angry, anxious, a bit demanding. "I can't believe that I've been on the phone this long. I can't get anything done with this institution," or whatever the case might be. So some of these questions, when you really look at your organization, it would be good to actually ask yourself, well, now, inadvertently, have we become siloed? Have we found ourselves in this particular position? Because sometimes, let me just say this as well, sometimes that happens and you don't even realize that it has happened. So what's the root cause? That's the next step you have to come to. Okay, so we're siloed. Now, why is it that we find ourselves siloed? Well, the first reason, and we talked about this in the last lecture, that people have a tendency to like the vertical organizational structure, that they resist this idea of complexity theory and this idea of a horizontal leadership structure, is because they enjoy the power that they have. They like that bottleneck. They like the idea that everything has to come through them. And if it hinders productivity or innovation, hey, so be it. But I like the authority that I have. I like the power that I have. So there's that. There's another element, of course, and that is trust. Sometimes it's very difficult, to trust that, hey, listen, they're not going to rebel, or they're not going to go off in some direction that you cannot have them go, or whatever the case is. There's a certain element of, I've got to trust that they want the best for the organization. I've got to trust that they're going to work together. I've got to trust that this is going to happen. And then the third reason that this sometimes happens when we're dealing with the root cause of the silo effect is institutionalization. Where, for instance, when you look at the military, there's a certain amount of pride about being in the Navy, or a certain amount of pride about the fact that I'm a Marine, or a certain amount of pride that I'm in the Army, a certain amount of pride that I'm in the Air Force, Coast Guard, maybe the Space Force. That's a new one that's coming. But my point is sometimes there's institutionalization where, hey, we become, in this case where this is what we do. Another thing that causes a silo effect is this idea of feeling like that, wow, we become so institutionalized, this is what we do, that we want to make sure that we protect the tradition, that we protect the way that things are right now, and we don't want them to change. They've got to stay this way. This is what we're looking to do. And so you can't just do that. You can't just talk about that. We're not looking for that. We want to keep everybody separate, and we'll just keep things running. We can make it efficient this way. Maybe not very innovative, but we can be efficient. and we'll just have to deal with it in that manner. These are some of the root causes that causes, or that is the reason for the silo effect. So what do you do about it? Now there's the second thing. Okay, so you've come to the conclusion, we're siloed, and you've even maybe figured out what that problem was. Maybe it's with you, maybe it's with something that's there, but you see some kind of incident. What do you do after that? That brings me to theory U. And there are some unique things about theory U that, if implemented, can help you to overcome the silo effect. Now, let me just start with the first thing. And that is that the leadership has to determine, has to be on board, has to decide, wow, you know what? We need to be more innovative. We have to be. There needs to be more adaptability. We need to be more adaptable in order to face the challenges in our particular industry, or the challenges that are coming our way in terms of maybe some things that are happening, within your institution, within your organization. You have to decide that there needs to be a change. If you, as the leader, have not come to that conclusion that there needs to be a change, everything else then doesn't mean anything. It's just, there's no way to overcome it. It starts with the leader. It starts with recognition and realizing that we have a silo, we have a lack of communication, there's a lack of interaction, there's a lack of innovation, there's a lack of adaptability, and somehow we have got to overcome the silo effect. When that happens, then you can implement, this is one way, there's probably other ways, but then you can implement theory U. So you come together, and you'll notice on your screen, the first thing that happens is the downloading of past patterns. And you're trying to, and you'll see where this is, where you're talking about honestly and openly looking at, okay, this has been our procedure. This has been some of the things that we've dealt with. This has been some of the things that we're doing. So here it is. These are our past patterns. This is what's happening. And then as we suspend, we start seeing with fresh eyes. We start honestly having a conversation. And the conversation with an open mind is this the best way? Is this really productive? Is this really helping us to succeed? Is this really helping us to gain everything that we're looking for? So that's the first thing that we see, is that we begin to see with fresh eyes, an open mind. You continue down the left side, and then suddenly in fact, let me go to the next slide, because I think it's a little clearer with the next slide. But I do want to say one particular thing on this slide. You see the VOJ, the VOC, and the VOF that is on the left side of your screen. These are the enemies of the progress that you're wanting to make. These are enemies of Theory U. What are they? First of all, there is the voice of judgment. That's VOJ, the voice of judgment, where you're constantly being judgmental. So one of the things that you're wanting to do here is, when you start seeing some of these things with fresh eyes, you have to immediately be intentional about suspending the voice of judgment. The VOC stands for, the VOC stands for the voice of cynicism, which you're redirecting that cynicism. Well, I don't know if that'll work. I don't know if I like that. It's stupid. Or, you know what? I heard some people, we were talking about some fresh ideas, and somebody said that's childish. Just very cynical, And you want to suspend and redirect that cynicism. You want to open up your heart to maybe this might be something, you know, that might be there. One way to do that is to begin to look into the field, begin to look at some of the customers and some of the surveys and some of the things that are taking place then. And you don't have to worry about what you're feeling, but you begin to see from the field, hey, listen, the climate's changing, customers' tastes are changing, things are happening, and so you start redirecting. So that's the voice of cynicism. Again, it's an enemy of theory U. You have to suspend that. You need to redirect that. And then VOF, the last enemy of theory U, is the voice of fear. And that is this idea of letting go. Boy, I'll tell you what, part of the reason for resistance to change is that people fear the unknown. They fear, well, if I let go of this, what have I got? If I don't know if I want to let this go, I don't know if I want to do this. So it's important for you to suspend that, to actually let that go and say, okay, you know what? It's I'm entering into new territory, but it could be exciting. It could be different. It could be more productive. It could actually take a load of work off of me. Well, then you get to this idea here of presencing. And this is then, at that point, that's when the collaboration begins. And that's then when you begin to allow for new ideas to come. This is when, and again, you'll notice you're coming up on the right side of theory U. And now, okay, maybe there's this idea, and you push back, and then they push back, and collectively, synergy begins to take place. And you'll remember when we were talking about complexity theory a couple of weeks ago that one of the things in emergence theory is that you're pushing towards synergy. The sum is greater than the individual parts, and as we come together, new ideas take place. Well, after this, then it becomes the crystallizing portion of this. This is when people begin to embrace this new collaborative model. They begin to embrace this idea of innovation and taking a new direction and doing certain things, and they begin to become comfortable with working together. And then you get to the embodying. This is where suddenly everybody is now together, and you start actually putting everything together, where you're actually developing the idea, the innovation that's going to take place. And then from there, of course, it comes to performing. Okay, and I said we were going to look at the next slide. Let's look at the next slide real quick. So you can see it because there it seems to be laid out just maybe a little bit maybe less scientific, but certainly a little bit more clearer. And it's where you're going from the past to the future, and you're overcoming these silos. You're coming into a brand new scheme or idea or organizational structure as to how you're going to communicate and how you're going to be together. So the first thing, open your mind. Listening beyond the frame of mind and ratings of the past. Well, this is the way we've always done it. This is the things that we have to do this. This was our mindset. This was the way that it was. I'll never forget my grandmother. She was talking to me, and she said, I hear people talking about the good old days. She said, we're living in the good old days. And I said, Granny, what are you talking about? She said, I don't want to go back to a washboard. She said, I don't want to go back to the way stoves were and the way things were. She said, things are so much better now than they were. And so, sometimes we will aggrandize the past. We'll reinvent our history. And we'll make it some kind of golden era when really we dismiss, forget, or overlook how difficult it was growing up at that time, and being alive during that time. So open your mind that maybe even the way, boy, we've been doing this and it's great, but maybe there's something that could come. So this was our past, this was here, but now I'm going to be listening and then observing. And this is reality beyond the prejudices. Emotional, social, systematic intelligence. This is where you are looking at the playing field as to where it was. Listen, in academia, and especially in colleges and universities, I remember when no one wanted to embrace online learning. That was something that was just, now every university in America, I shouldn't say every, I'm probably overstating my position, but I would dare say probably 98% of all the universities in America, and maybe 100, but I'm going to say 98 just to kind of hedge my bets here, all have an online program. And why is that? Because the climate change, because the environment change. So you got to open your heart to that. You got to be willing, and that means try not to be so cynical. And then the third thing is sensing. And that is where that you open the will. Now you're gonna overcome this fear of change and doing something different, of letting go of the past. And boy, that's the biggest thing, isn't it? We've always done it this way, and now letting go to do something different. Oh, that's tough. It's tough for ministers. We've always done it this way. One of the things my father cannot grasp hold of yet is why in so many of your contemporary churches that they're not dressed in a suit. And he just cannot get past that. And I would tell him, Dad, it doesn't really matter. What matters is what's being preached, what's being said. But, it's being opening the will and being willing to let go of the past and embrace the future. Well, once you get to this point, now you are in presencing. And this is the deepest source of self. So you ask yourself at this point, well, now who am I? What's my real job here? What am I really trying to do? What are we trying to accomplish? What is our real purpose? And then at that point, you let the future arise. You start crystallizing around this new renewed working group, and then you start coming up with some practical applications. Together you create newness, and you start getting results, and it catapults you into the future. And what you have done with Theory U, it has led you from silos to more adaptation, or an adapted work group setting where people are now collaborating together. And you see where all of that is happening. Well, so that gives you at least a little idea as you're going through your reading with General McChrystal. And he starts talking about silos, and he starts talking about overcoming silos, and getting into this idea of team of teams and that sort of thing. You're going to have a better understanding now of what silos are, and even an understanding of how to overcome those silos. One idea, there's lots of other ways, by the way, that you can overcome silos. The main thing is to get people communicating, but a great way to do that is using Theory U. As I tell you every week, make sure that you do your reading, and I look forward to interacting with you this week in your studies. God bless you.